Uh, let's first
Recording in
start.
progress.
Sorry,
Sorry, Mike.
that's all right. I was wondering who was talking to me. It was the recording device. Uh, Before we start, we do have a new member of the Planning Commission who was just appointed on Tuesday, I think.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sorry.
Brendan Sage. And Brendan, you want to give a little brief introduction of yourself?
Sure. I'm very honored to join the Planning Commission. Just a little bit about me. I'm a pretty new resident to Winooski. My wife and I moved here early April, but know Chittenden County pretty well. Went to UVM undergrad. My wife is from South Burlington originally, and after a few years away, we're now back in the area and really enjoying living in Winooski. And interested in potentially trying to buy a home here, really make a life here. And it's been pretty amazing for me to see how the city has changed since I was at UVM almost 10 years ago. And there's a lot of good things going on, but there's also a lot of challenges as well, I think, as everyone recognizes, particularly related to housing. And so my goal is to just learn and try and contribute a little bit of a different perspective as a relatively young person in the city trying to potentially buy a house and make a life here. And I'll have a lot to learn, and I'll probably listen more at the start and try to contribute more as my term goes on.
Great. Thanks, Brendan. So just so you know, do a little intro that the Planning Commission members, besides myself and you, Brendan, are Sarah, Amy, Abby, Joe, Tommy, and who did I miss?
You. No.
Well, I don't count. And then we've got guests tonight, and I see Robert Millar from the Housing Commission, Jim Duncan, who's on the City Council and is the council liaison to the Housing Commission, I believe. Mayor Christine Lott is here. Seth Leonard from VHFA, did I get that right, Seth? Former mayor. And Tom Getz, a developer in town. At this point, I don't know if Seth or Tom, you want to say anything as an introduction since you are guests with us tonight.
Nice to see you all. We look forward to the conversation. I think I would just say right off the bat that most of us in the housing and development world think Winooski is doing a whole lot right. So that's a good place to start maybe for today, and look forward to answering questions and helping them with the conversation any way we can.
Thanks, Seth.
Yes, and thank you for inviting me to be here and talk about developing affordable housing. I'm the CEO of Summit Properties, and we that development of affordable housing is our bread and butter. We manage 1,400 apartments in Vermont, New Hampshire, upstate New York, and new ground up development of affordable housing is the bulk of what we do. We have about 1,000 apartments in that territory that we've developed, including 2 recent ones in Winooski, which I'm sure everyone has seen, with Cassavant Overlook being 39 apartments, and Park Terrace right on East Island, which is 45 units and fully leased up with folks moving in next week. So the demand is tremendous, obviously, and yeah, looking forward to chatting tonight and talking about one thing I will say is I completely agree with Seth that I've developed in a lot of different communities and regions, and Winooski is not just a good place to develop. The regulations are really great in my opinion, and have made the process of our last 2 developments in Winooski go the way that, in my opinion, the process should go to support, when you have a goal of promoting the development of affordable housing in areas that you want it, the regulations and then the folks that are implementing those regulations have been great to work with. So looking forward to diving in and chatting more.
Great. Thanks, Tom. I think I neglected to introduce Heather Carrington, staff. So economic development, what's your title specifically, Heather? I should know.
Community and Economic Development Officer for the city.
I am the staff liaison to the Housing Commission.
Right? And Eric Vorwalt, who is our, what's the right word? Planning manager? Planning and zoning manager?
Planning and zoning manager, yeah.
Okay, there you go. Okay. All right, so the introductions are done. Let me see, any changes to the agenda for tonight? Hearing none. I'll open it for public comment. Eric, are there any members from the public out there with us?
There is one member of the public that is joining us on Zoom. So I don't know, I will allow you to speak. If you have anything you'd like to say, feel free to unmute yourself. Otherwise, we can move on.
Is that Philippe? Did I get that
Correct.
right? Okay.
Yeah, hi. I'm a new resident of Winooski, and I came to express my support of reduced parking minimums, and here for the ride, I guess.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
So next agenda item is approval of the previous meeting minutes. Looking for a motion and a second on that.
I motion to approve.
Okay.
Look good.
Do I have a second by Tommy? Are there any changes or edits suggested to the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye or raise your hand. Anyone opposed? Anyone wish to abstain? Amy? Okay, I think that passed. I hope you were counting, Eric.
Yep, I got it.
Okay. Next, I'll throw it over to you, Eric, for a discussion of the housing affordability and land use policy.
Yes, so thank you very much. So tonight we have, as we've already gone through some introductions, we have some guests with us tonight to talk about housing affordability and land use policy, specifically looking at parking. The Housing Commission was tasked with reviewing information related to housing and affordability, and specifically looking at parking and how parking may be impacting the housing affordability. So the Housing Commission has spent some time looking at that information and has prepared a memo. You may recall we did receive a memo from the Housing Commission back in 2019 that had some information related to parking and housing affordability. That has been updated and submitted back again in your agenda packet. So in order to kind of, the reason why we're having this discussion tonight is because as the Planning Commission, one of your roles is to review the existing land use policy and recommend changes or amendments that may better align with either trends that are happening in the community, or to help address issues that we're seeing, either to support specific community initiatives or to work to kind of identify where we can better serve the community in that regard. So tonight, as mentioned, we have Tom Getz with Summit Properties and Seth Leonard with Vermont Housing Finance Agency, as well as Robert Millar and Heather. Robert Millar representing the Housing Commission, Councilor Duncan is the council liaison to the Housing Commission, and Heather Carrington as the staff liaison to the Housing Commission, to talk about their perspectives, and not only the memo and kind of what the Housing Commission has gone through, but to talk specifically about housing policy and the issues that they're seeing and facing as they try to develop housing, and in particular affordable housing, and how parking may be impacting that ability to develop not only the affordable housing, but the housing mix that we as the Planning Commission have talked about in the past. So trying to establish housing that is has more bedrooms, or has a greater mix of unit styles and types that we're looking for, instead of a lot of what we're seeing now are just either studios or one bedrooms, which, as Tom mentioned, are getting leased up very quickly, but not necessarily the only style of housing that we're trying to get here in the city. So that's part of the reason why we wanted to have this discussion tonight, was, again, as we're looking at our land use regulations and looking at changes and amendments, we wanted to make sure that we were cognizant of the potential issues that may be impacting the types of development that we're seeing and what we can do to change those, primarily looking at parking for tonight's discussion. So any questions from anyone on kind of what it is that we're doing tonight, or why we're here, or how this is going to get wrapped into our work?
So one question, Eric.
Sure.
So we still don't have the parking survey that was being done this summer. That's not available yet.
That's correct. So the parking inventory analysis and management plan that is being conducted, we are actually scheduled to have our next advisory committee meeting on I believe the 22nd of this month. So we will we'll be looking at the model, and we'll be looking at specific policy recommendations that advisory committee will be reviewing. And then the next step, hopefully in October, we will have a draft report from that will provide those recommendations from the advisory committee. So in the next couple of months, we should have that information, or at least council will be, that information should be presented to council.
So this is sort of all the information we're going to gather tonight is, I mean, we're not making any decisions tonight because we're going to need that study before we move forward with anything concrete, I would imagine.
That's correct. Yeah, we're not intending to make any decisions tonight. This is really to be an informative discussion to kind of, to look at to basically look at the folks that are out in the world dealing with housing policy every day, to see how things like parking are impacting housing and the type of housing that gets developed.
Okay.
So if there's no other questions, I think what I would do is turn it over to Tom or Seth, whichever one of you maybe wants to go first, and kind of introduce your perspective on policies and parking and how that impacts development, or how you see development occurring. So
Tom, want me to talk a little bit about state policy, some of those high level things, and then let you drill in?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Great. So just a little bit about what I do for VHFA and what role we play in the state on this issue. I oversee the state's tax credit allocation award program and our development financing at the agency. We're the primary source of funding available for the development of affordable housing. Statewide last year, about 50% of the new starts on new construction, and this is statewide, were affordable units. And that's a trend that we're not terribly happy about. That's outside of Chittenden County. It's pretty much affordable housing or not much else new being built, which is what's really exciting about talking to all of you here today, is because you actually already have some other things being built, and that's exciting. In addition to that work on the financing and tax credit allocation award side of things, we support state and local policymakers in making informed decisions. Heather uses housingdata.org all the time, right, Heather? Yes. So housingdata.org is a great resource for planning commissions, local housing commissions. And one of the things we do there is we try to assemble best practices and recommendations, both from local municipalities and nationwide examples of what types of policies we know work for affordable housing across the state and are backed as much as possible by data. And in addition to that, I also oversee our asset management and compliance, meaning we see how these projects operate over time and how they perform and what issues come down the river. So it's easy to build something, maybe not easy, but it's easy to build something and not think about the consequences and measure it afterwards. But our shop pays a lot of attention to how did things turn out operationally, and how did the decisions around parking and other infrastructure decisions during the development process shake out. I've got a couple quick slides, Eric, if that's okay, just to frame a couple quick concepts. I won't share my screen for too long. It's saying it's disabled right now.
oh, let me I will make you a co-host, and you should be able to. All right, try it now.
Cool. All right. We've all been doing this a long time, but I'll ask that age-old question. Can everybody see my screen? Can everybody see the slides? I'm putting this one up first because just want to encapsulate. We are talking about scarce resources when it comes to the development, specifically of affordable housing finance. Every year we have roughly about $59 million in available resources to develop housing. I'm using the word develop, and that $59 million, that's a combination of state and federal funding that comes into Vermont each year for affordable housing, is split not just amongst new construction projects, but also amongst all of the rehabilitation projects that occur in the state. Okay, so an example, we spent quite a bit of money on Spring Street doing a rehabilitation project that will be upcoming between a split project owned by Champlain Housing Trust in Winooski and also at the Fort. But then you've got the new construction projects that Tom just referenced as well. I think a big number to take away from this conversation discussion is right now in the affordable realm, we're running about $330,000 per unit for a new unit of rental housing. So does that seem high to folks? Does that surprise anybody? Yeah. So you can imagine that math problem that exists, right? And I'm okay too. I love conversation and questions versus me talking at you all. But how's that $330,000 per unit sit?
Seth, what's in that? Is there land in that? Is there, what exactly is in the $330,000?
Yeah, it's an all-in. So it's the development costs associated. It includes some soft costs too, Mike. It's not just hard construction.
Do you know what the breakout is between the hard costs and soft costs?
Yeah, hard costs usually end up running about 60% in a typical project. They might lean as far as 65 on a rehabilitation project. They're more in the 40s range. That's tipped a lot though, as a result of the pandemic. We're seeing costs increase at an astronomical level. So a recent survey we did amongst development professionals and construction entities in the state found the average project increase to be 25%. And prior to the pandemic, and that's just over the last 18 months, we have projects right now outside of Chittenden County that are coming in at $386,000 per unit for residential construction. Most of that has to do with material and labor shortages and availability right now. I think that's
Can I ask a question in terms of this particular slide? This is speaking to the rental market. Are you also involved, and forgive me if I should have known this, in the owner component of development, home ownership?
Yes, yeah. So for example, Butternut Station, it's not being called station anymore. I'm sorry about that. We'll just say the community center development, Butternut, with CHT, that's funded with the state tax credit homeownership program. There's a chronic underfunding of homeownership incentives though in the state. So the pool of funds we have available for homeownership support every year is just a hair over $1 million in total equity. We do not put a lot in homeownership construction subsidy in the state. Whereas for a 9% tax credit project, a couple of which Tom will talk about in a few minutes, the average subsidy level that we're providing just with the tax credit program is usually between 62 and 70% of the total development cost. Because you can imagine how on earth could you charge affordable rents for something that costs $330,000 to build, right? The math just doesn't work. Divide that over that cost over 30 years, and it doesn't take you very long to say, boy, if I'm getting rents that would be affordable to anybody in the even 60% area median income range, the math doesn't work. It's a math problem. It needs subsidy.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, Tommy. That graph on the right is in normal times, and that 59 million is in normal times. You may have recalled that as part of the governor's package for the American Recovery Act funding, or ARPA, that you may have heard some about, that the governor proposed $249 million in one-time funding to go towards the subsidy of housing. So that includes some home ownership, and we're in the process of working with Department of Housing and Community Development on exactly what that's going to look like, because we've got a few $1 million to work with on that front. So there will be some more news on home ownership development coming soon.
That sounds great.
Hey, Seth,
Yeah.
two questions for you. One,
Yeah.
are you seeing the cost of materials starting to decrease?
On the ground, slowly. Commodity prices are changing faster than what we're actually seeing on the ground. If you give me just a second, I'm going to zoom out and stop my share, and I'll show you a different graph. I just don't want to give everybody whiplash finding it.
While you're looking for that $330,000, what's the size unit that references? Is it probably average? So
yeah, we actually don't find it useful to do square footage. It's easier to do a per unit a per unit basis, and I'll say that right now primarily our projects are skewing towards studio and 1 bedrooms. That's a known fact. There's more recent pressure to include additional 2 and 3 bedroom units at times, but from a marketability standpoint, those are much more challenging units, to be really blunt, to be filled over and over again, and they're more expensive to subsidize. So we do use a per unit match because it actually lines up pretty perfectly on the square footage, and we feel like it translates better for folks.
so it's safe to say that that's probably like a 1 bedroom?
Yeah, there's a lot. Yes, there are a lot of 1 bedrooms in that mix. We are at 1.34 on our average building or our average unit size over the last 5 years. 1.34 bedrooms, and that includes a bunch of zeros, right? Efficiencies count as a 0 in our world, and then 1 bedrooms and a decent little mix of 2 bedrooms and a couple 3 bedrooms. And that includes rehabilitation projects, so that's not just new construction.
If I can add, Mike, there is in the memo, I've referenced an inclusionary housing, utilizing the Grounded Solutions inclusionary housing calculator. You can go through that. If you click into that, you can actually look at different incentives, different configurations of bedroom numbers, and you can see the numbers. It really goes through, what the pricing would be and what the impacts of reducing parking or adding, affordable units would be on the cost per unit.
Great, thanks.
Here the top, from our survey, the top responses in terms of what was causing increases in costs right now. On a homeownership project in White River, excuse me, not White River, Woodstock, we saw lumber prices go up 85% on the project. And a duplex that we expected to fund at about $295,000 for total construction costs, we ended up paying $485,000 per unit for new construction on the duplex. And to be transparent, Butternut Station's not far off from that. And so, Mike, we're not seeing the prediction on the ground in terms of what people are thinking is that we won't see prices normalize. If you want to break out the crystal ball, we won't see prices in those excuse me, those goods normalize until early 2022 is the current market projections. So in the market, if you look up lumber pricing as a Wall Street item, it's starting to come down, but throw a hurricane or two in there and on the ground, it's not the builder's experience yet that it's gotten lower. Okay, so let me get back on here. I'd just like to start with that a little bit to put into perspective what we're looking at in terms of actual constraints and issues with resources, because it helps to understand when you're looking at a policy item like this, how important it is that we erect as few barriers to making something that's already a very challenging math problem work. And this is just a picture of, and Tom, you've got a project that's not entered in here. If people start looking at the numbers and say that looks low, just activated tax credit units funded by the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. And pardon me, I work in a lot of acronyms, so always call me out when you see LIHTC, that's the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. Winooski, from a proportional standpoint, is doing the best of any community in the state on a per capita basis in terms of getting those tax credits. And that will improve when Tom's next project that he's talking about is fully leased up. You'll actually have the highest utilization per capita in the state of the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. So when you are designing housing policy in the city, that's something to be aware of, is that we don't really have a whole lot more in terms of resources and subsidy to put into the city. We're doing the best that we can possibly do as statewide funders right now, just to be transparent about that, unless the pie grows. And that says that you're doing a lot right. And just to go back to this slide a second, you know, that the gears over to the side are trying to tell you that a lot of our funding decisions are made in coordination with the planning process that Winooski's hugged so tightly and participated in with the state designations, maintaining your state designated downtown and neighborhood designation areas. We get somewhere between $2 and $4 requested for every one that we have to give each year. And we don't like to say scoring projects, but that's what we do. We score projects. And the top item for many years has been designation location. And it's because we're concerned about ensuring that affordable housing developments are placed in communities where there's adequate access to walkable streets, there's adequate access to public transportation, access to healthcare, and access to jobs. Those are the things that we're concerned about as affordable housing policymakers. We want those things to jive together. And then we want to see that you're doing a good job of participating in those state programs, because we know if you're going to redo Main Street or you're going to do you know, a sidewalk project, you've got a much better chance if you're in those designation programs and playing well with the state of getting those funding resources. If you've that's a good thing for our projects too. We like to know that you're participating with the state planning process, and that's why we stay so close to the state consolidated plan. And it filters down into the way we make our decisions, which we do through this thing called the Qualified Allocation Plan, which is the document that really steers the largest pool of affordable housing resources. And going back to those survey results about what people are experiencing in terms of costs. So we held a forum with 76 development construction specialists 2 weeks ago. And the first 30 minutes of it was a combination of development consultants and developers voicing frustrations in regards to how they're meeting different, on the same issue, they're having to meet so many different thresholds for different policymakers, and particularly where state, local, and regional policies overlap. So that's just a general pitch to you all, not necessarily specific to parking, but that is highlighted as a huge, huge use of time for developers and jumping through hoops, and it adds a lot of cost. Meaning, hey, we've met this requirement that the state has for this issue, but now we also have to meet at the municipal level, and there's a difference between the two. Just getting into brass tacks when you get into actual parking requirements, a lot of folks ask us, well, what is your policy on parking? And our answer is, and again, we finance the majority of the affordable housing development that occurs, is we actually don't have one. It's talk to us, show us what facilities are going to support parking in general. We, for the first time in our history, actually just financed a project in Morrisville that has not one single hardscape parking space associated with it. They've got a parking agreement with the town to meet their needs, and we were satisfied with that. That was fine. So we don't require it. This comes from the American Housing Equity Investor Fund manual, so to speak. So this is the entity, for lack of better words, that buys these tax credits, or they guide the agencies that buy these tax credits and create all that equity that goes into the projects. And it's kind of the gold standard in terms of what underwriting requirements are applied to tax credit projects. And it starts off by saying, yeah, this one-to-one thing is good. It's a good place to start, but it goes pretty quickly down to this idea of market study, appraiser, and comparable projects in the primary market area. Meaning, what kind of facilities exist on the street? Can it be justified? Is the appraiser okay with it? Is the lack of parking spaces impacting the value in some way, shape, or form? There's not an overarching policy when it comes to finance and the lending decisions that get made about how many parking spaces there are. It's incumbent upon the project developer to convince us that it's a good idea. Does that make sense? Cool. Just another process that we engaged on and informed is the zoning for great neighborhoods. And apologies if you've already seen this. And Winooski, again, is looked at as a community that's exceeding a lot of these in a lot of ways. But the state put painstaking efforts into coming up with a baseline set of recommendations for towns to consider, and brought in a number of consultants, engaged with a number of planners statewide, the Vermont Planning Association, and came up with these ideas about how to address parking issues and parking reform. And we participated in the group, helped fund this, and just generally agreed that these are good philosophical approaches. Reducing the number of on-site parking spaces is a good thing. Allow on-street, where appropriate, to count towards that inventory. And what Winooski's already doing to require new parking spaces to be behind buildings, and eliminating parking minimums is a discussion point too, and allowing on-street parking in areas. And you have to realize that this is a set of recommendations that goes out to a state. You have a planner. There are so many communities across the state that do not have an Eric and a Heather, and in some cases don't really even have a functional planning commission, right? So this is also trying to provide a roadmap for those communities to make decisions. I've just got a little bit about the items on here. Again, we kind of jumped ahead on this a little bit, but what's causing delays and cost increases right now across the state? And it's material and supply and labor availability and the hard cost issues. But I think it's really important to also notice the number of respondents that did identify, they just kind of left it in the medium range, regulatory permitting at the state and local level, and how it can be challenging and can add cost to projects. And that's a tale of woe as old as time from developers. Like I understand that for a lot of developers, there would be no rules in a lot of cases. But I think our general reflection, or my reflection back to your community, would be, is that from our perspective, you're doing a good job. And the cost of the projects that we're seeing developed in Winooski are actually a little lower, not a little lower. They actually, Tom can point out some numbers where they're getting well below that 330 average that we're seeing statewide. And that's a good sign. That means things are functioning here. It's not getting weighed down in processing costs. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen there.
And Seth, you think that's because our process is just efficient? I mean, is there other reasons you think the prices are lower? Is the quality of the housing just as good? And is I guess.
My answer to your first question would be yes, it's predictability. Development has so many unknowns, and the development timeline, the further out you are, the greater your risk is, and the less money you want to invest. And your job really as policymakers, in our opinion, is the quicker you can narrow the range of possibilities and outcomes that a development might have in decision-making process, the more quickly a developer is going to spend real money on a project to get it done. And it's actually going to get across the finish line. We've got, I've got a project in Wilder, Vermont right now that has a pitched roof that probably cost the project about $750,000 in delays, a year and a half, arguing over whether a project should have a flat roof or a pitched roof. And there was no infrastructure to house those conversations at the community level. And it just became everybody got their pen out and drew what they wanted at public meetings. And that's just an untenable environment to expect that, again, with these types of scarce resources, that a project's going to get across the line. And quite frankly, that experience scares us. That doesn't make us confident that somebody's going to be able to push a project across the finish line. So, as I would just say, Winooski's got predictable processes, in my opinion.
Mike, Abby has her hand raised here.
Abby does, go for it.
Is my mic working?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So thanks for the presentation, Seth. Nice to see you. A lot of what our planning commission, our conversations around housing have really been spending time on family size housing. And I think now you have a new little one, or you have a child, spaces get tight real quick. And what Winooski has a lot of is tiny spaces and small units. So a lot of our energy and discussion has been around the bigger units. How do we get bigger units? And you sort of really quickly mentioned that from your perspective, or from your authority's perspective, that it was more desirable to have the smaller units. I get why a developer would be able to get more money out of it, but I'm wondering why your group came to that conclusion, and what we can do to sort of, from your perspective, to like move away from these studio one bedrooms and attract more families in Winooski and keep families in Winooski by having larger units.
Yeah, so just to, and I can hear where I came across that way. We don't necessarily just promote the 0 and 1 bedrooms, right? It's when a market study comes out, or we look at the housing needs assessment, or we measure market absorption rates, meaning like how fast units lease up. We just can't lease 1 bedrooms fast enough, right? And so from a need perspective, that keeps moving to the forefront, and we see shrinking family sizes just demographically as a state. But I think you bring up a really good point, that your community might want to foster that. What I would say back is, I would try to find a tool that incentivizes it versus requiring it, because from a market study standpoint, requiring something like that, it could create an uncomfortable dynamic in terms of funding resources and what makes good financial feasibility sense, if you understand what I'm saying. So it's easier to stop housing construction with policy than it is to encourage it. And if there's a bonus or an incentive of some kind, or a financial investment that supports or encourages additional bedrooms in the 3-bedroom size, for example, that's probably what we would just say is a better idea.
Yeah, I can add to that. There's also a disincentive in our zoning right now for 3+ bedroom. So when you get to that point in many of the residential districts, there's an additional requirement for another 0.5 parking spaces. So that increases the cost as well. So that, I think that's functioning as an active disincentive.
Yeah, so I know that our planning commission is really interested in exploring incentives and getting rid of disincentives to get more family size housing in the city. So I don't think, we had ever discussed or even knew that you could require it. I think it was just like all of the new developments that are going up in Winooski, which are quite a lot, are studio 1 bedroom, and families are leaving in droves. And even the housing authority said we have to send people with vouchers out of Winooski because we can't accommodate families here. Yeah. So that's definitely high on our radar, and hopefully part of this discussion today. I think that's where we would be interested in discussing density bonuses, parking minimum reductions, those sort of levers that we have to get a developer to think about a bigger unit.
Yeah.
Well said, Abby. Good.
Yep.
Yep.
I can share with the Planning Commission. I've recently done an analysis of the net change in number of units across different bedroom counts and across home ownership versus rentals. We've had a net increase in 3+ bedrooms since 2018. So we're not, the narrative that we're losing, as buildings come down, we're losing 3 bedrooms. That's not accurate. We're gaining them, but we're gaining them at a much slower rate than we are gaining the studios and 1 bedrooms. So ultimately what that will do, if that continues, is that will continue to create that gap and widen that gap. But we aren't losing them currently, we're gaining them.
Okay, that's helpful.
So Seth, thank you for that part. I'd like to get Tom in here before we run out of time tonight.
Yeah, thank you. And I will circle back to the bedroom size, because I think that is a really important one. We've got some real recent experience on a mix of unit sizes in our 2 most recent buildings that I think is really relevant. But just sort of stepping back, sort of the big picture, it was really interesting. I hadn't seen that statistic that Seth put up before, that Winooski's utilization of tax credits per capita is leading the way in the state, or at the top. And I think that is great, and that's, in my opinion, not an accident. And I think that is a direct result of the steps taken to promote development in the places that the city wants it, through a process that's predictable. I mean, that's, getting that neighborhood development area and downtown designation, which makes it so that when we go to build affordable housing, it's exempt from Act 250. Getting the form-based code in the gateway districts to show, so that we know when we come in that we're going to have a predictable process. Those are the things that, some of the, other than, it's a great place to build, but there's a lot of places that we would look at, and seeing those, having that process to be, clear were some of the things that drew us to Winooski. And the Cassavant project in particular, that one, I've used this example talking to folks throughout the state and in New Hampshire and upstate New York, of a development experience that was really rare and unique in the affordable housing world. Because typically, if you talk to affordable housing developers, when they take a project and envision it, from conception till from that point on till it's actually, that's a 3 to 4 year process to get to completion that it takes. It just takes a long time to get your permitting, to get your design, then to go through the actual process of applying for all the various affordable housing resources that are necessary to make this project a reality. And so any area that you can make more predictable and streamlined, it makes it that much more likely that you're going to be able to actually develop that affordable housing cost effectively. And Cassavant, that one, so it was October 2017 that we first conceived of that project. It was on a parcel owned by Nate and Jackie DeJess, who I'm sure most of you are very familiar with. And from October 2017, we went in with the city, met with Jesse, met with well, shoot, I'm forgetting who the planning and zoning administrator was at the time now. But from the very first meeting, it was, this is the type of development in the area we want. We are going to help you get through this process as quickly as possible. We were fully permitted by February 1st, which was the deadline for our tax credit application. Got our award in May, started construction in September, and we're done and fully leased by the next September. So that type of timeline is not possible almost anywhere else in the state. And it took a lot of years of planning to allow that to happen. It wasn't. And so I've used that example a lot of times. And so big picture for me is Winooski's doing things the right way. So all, the suggestions that I have, feedback on parking and other things, it's more tweaks as I see it. And, I hope that from VHFA's point of view, they see this as, an area that want to keep giving tax credits to show the other communities that, look, if you do things right, this communities like this, it's going to attract development and it's going to be cost effective. So this is where credits need to be allocated.
That was subtle, Tom.
It's a good place to build, Seth. Jumping over to the specific, the parking question for tonight, we have obviously a lot of, 1,400 apartments, a ton of data on our parking needs across different types of housing, across different areas that we have properties. And I think that my overall points would be one, yes, structured parking. When you have to build structured parking, it's incredibly expensive. Our data matches up with what was in the housing commissions. It's about $35,000 per parking space that's required. So it's a big factor cost wise when you have to get that in the small lots, the Winooski Gateway District lots. A lot of the places that we want affordable housing to be built, they're on small lots because that's where we're trying to get access to transportation and have the development in areas that are appropriate for affordable housing. So that means that there's probably not going to be, you will rely on underground parking, and that's going to be really expensive. So to have unnecessary parking requirements is definitely a big cost impediment. And from our point of view, there are ways I can see that we have so much data on with the parking that we need, that to have some flexibility that is data-based, that I know there was sort of overall recommendations to have some sort of process in the code to present data and arguments. Okay, yes, this is our typical parking requirement, but you've shown in whether it's market studies or other buildings why in this case you can use some on-street parking to lower that. I think that that's a fantastic approach. I would say with the form-based code is great, but it leaves very little wiggle room for things like this. So it's the one drawback is you check the boxes and you go, but every once in a while I think it is appropriate to have an issue like this where we say, no, there can be a waiver process. Not all, not all developments are created equally. Some of the major categories in our portfolio, we have about 900 apartments of independent senior living, and the demands there, it's 0.6 or 0.7 vehicles per unit. Our typical affordable mixed income property is about the 1-to-1, one vehicle to unit is about what folks have. That's a sort of portfolio average. And then there's some deep subsidy homeless supportive services properties that we manage that might be 0.3 or 0.4 vehicles per per unit. So it just doesn't, in my opinion, make sense to have the same requirement that with no flexibility where you, so to allow something in the process that would allow that data to be presented to factor in the availability of on-street parking, I think would be great. So just, in specifics to Winooski, Cassavant overlooked 39 apartments. It's got 22 2-bedrooms, 17 1-bedrooms, and we've had right about 40 vehicles the whole time we've been there. We were required to do 44 spaces. So there's a little bit of excess. There's some street parking. In my opinion, in that location, it's slightly more than we probably, a few spaces more than we probably would have said, let's 1-to-1 is what we would have requested, or 0.9-to-1, something like that. So I don't think that overall for our developments, I would say, it's way off base. We're way overbuilding parking for the last two types of buildings that we built in Winooski, the Park Terrace and the Cassavant buildings. I think they're pretty close to what we would have wanted anyways. So that's...
Hey, Tom, if I can interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
You just talked about Cassavant 1-to-1 and the unit mix there. What about at Park Terrace, you're calling it?
Park Terrace is 45 apartments, and there are, I believe it's 54 spaces. We have that small, there's a 1,600 square foot commercial space that, in addition to the 45 apartments. So it's a little more than that 1-to-1.
Which one are you talking about?
So right across from Cassavant Overlook, the one that's under construction, just finishing construction now.
Not the big one, but not the small one, but the bigger one.
The big, yeah.
The Hood House site.
Yes.
Yeah, the Wood House.
Yeah.
So what's the mix of units in that?
That is, it's, I think, 11 studios, 24 1-bedroom and 10 2-bedrooms.
Okay.
And that does, so just quickly going to the unit mix discussion, we did at Cassavant, we did the 22 2-bedrooms. We did majority 2-bedrooms and then 17 1-bedrooms and no studios. And that was at a time where VHFA was actually really encouraging and incentivizing the development of 2-bedroom units. And our experience there with the lease up was that the 1-bedrooms were just flying off the shelves, fully leased months and months before we opened up. The 2-bedrooms, much more challenging.
But do you have families living in those 2 bedrooms, or is
We've
it
not
like,
had a lot of demand from families. No, we thought we would. We almost, I mean, we were, the expectation was that we would end up with, it would interest a lot more families, and we've not seen as much family interest as we've expected. And so we did a more balanced unit mix at Park Terrace, and we did the, you know, only 10 2-bedrooms instead of sort of the majority 2. So it's been an interesting process, but yes, the demand at Park Terrace, it's fully leased now, so the demand for the 2 bedrooms is certainly there. But the ones in the studios, again, were the first things to go.
If I could ask a question, Tom, to the extent that you've built 3 bedrooms or managed 3 bedrooms, have you found that those go more slowly than the 2 bedrooms, or is it a situation where maybe like 2 bedrooms is too much for a couple, but it's not enough for like a family?
Yeah, and we don't have a ton of 3 bedrooms in our whole portfolio. We maybe have 33 bedrooms, something like that, and they are more challenging. There's a line. We know that there's long wait lists, but when a unit turns over, there's just not always a family ready to move, and so they just don't turn over as quickly. Our wait lists for the 1 and 2 bedrooms and studios everywhere are so long, and there's just no question that when that unit turns over, there's going to be somebody ready to take it. And it's just that we have some 4 bedrooms in our portfolio too, only a few of them. We know the demand's there, but it doesn't seem that it's just not as predictable when you
so
go
is
back.
it a lack of marketing to these families, say in the Winooski community, that we're not getting through to say this is available? I mean, is it just that maybe there's people who are not savvy to be on top of what's becomes available quickly enough? I mean, I'm just throwing it out. I'm not saying you have to answer that, but
No, I wish I knew the answer to that. I mean, our 2 bedrooms are more challenging than the ones, but still full. So we try to, you know, market as
full with 2 friends as opposed to
couples, some couples with 1 child, but not, we don't even have, I mean, last I looked at or checked in at Casavan, I think there was only a handful of children.
If I could make a suggestion, a lot of times the way we try to validate units is to do a survey of the local housing authority wait lists. And that might be a good thing for you to do, to just take a temperature. Burlington Housing Authority, the last I saw, it was around 15% of their vouchers served households that were 3 bedrooms or larger, but a substantial portion of those households were what we would consider overhoused, meaning that if they applied for a new unit, they wouldn't actually qualify for a 3-bedroom home again. And that's another kind of chronic issue, because it uses that voucher subsidy up in a way that limited resource gets strained too. But that might just be a suggestion for you to measure that. Ask the Winooski Housing Authority and Burlington Housing Authority what their wait list for 3-bedroom homes look like, and that gives you a sense of the demand.
And Seth, while you're speaking, can you share what's going on with and it doesn't sound like Tom develops condos, but what's going on with the condominium market, and is that something you guys finance as well?
It is, yeah, and we're partial funders of the of Butternut Station as an example. Condominium development at large has kind of grinded to a halt due to financing mechanics. Just long story short, the units by and large need to be sold almost before the thing gets built. It's pretty frustrating. The large financing entities, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and FHA, are primary funders for this type of development, and their requirements on condos are very conservative. There's a meeting next week with the Department of Housing and the governor's office to talk about this exact issue, about how we could potentially pump some money into condo development and affordable condo development specifically, but it is a tough nut to crack.
Abby, if the reason that Butternut Grove, that's what it is now, even though there are no trees there, Seth, it's Butternut Grove. The reason that that is going forward is actually Michael Monty did some very creative financing with that and used new market tax credits that aren't generally used that way. So he kind of came up with a new model for funding that. So, you know, there are creative ways to get around it. And I hope that there will be more people utilizing that.
So Joe, I saw you had a question.
Oh, it's more of an observation than anything that I think we have talked about this at the Planning Commission before, and I don't know that Winooski really has any way of shaping this, but it really does seem like the only way to promote owner-occupied family housing in a growing city with limited land masses through condominiums, which we are not building.
Right.
Tom, anything else you want to add? Did we cut you off?
No, I think that was the only other note I had down just was in terms of other ways to promote, you know, affordable housing. There was, I saw some recommendations that, you know, potentially do some, you know, on the impact fees that and other fee waivers. Winooski is not overly burdensome in that area, whereas other communities, you know, in relation to other areas we develop. But I could see, you know, what I see maybe as low-hanging fruit in that area. If they're, you know, want to encourage the development of affordable housing, you've got things like the sewer and impact fees, where it's pretty easy to demonstrate how much usage we have with clear data. And if you had an incentive, that's real money, you know, $90,000 on the project that is just finishing up right now of impact fees, which is based on a usage that's just, you know, state published. So there's areas like that I do think are opportunities to help incentivize affordable housing in addition to the parking area. So that's about all I have.
Okay. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Eric, maybe I'll throw it over, ask if Robert or Jim or Heather, folks who are joining us from the Housing Commission or that side, want to add anything?
I'm going to, I just want to give a little bit of the background. You know, we made recommendations in 2019, and I think that effectively what we're doing is bringing forward those same recommendations. And, you know, a couple of the process things that we made as recommendations, one of them was to do the parking inventory study that is currently ongoing, will influence your ability to take action on these in the future. So we are definitely continuing to support the recommendations that were initially made. And I think that in doing our research on the impact from a strict lens of housing affordability, the parking minimum requirements make housing less affordable. So, you know, if there's one takeaway, it's those are increasing the cost of housing in our community. So anything that can be considered to reduce those required minimums, and we've given you a series of different options to consider, would impact housing affordability. But in addition to that, recently we've been having kind of the same conversation on a parallel track that you all have been having about multi-bedroom units. And, you know, we've been talking about how we want to welcome new families, but where will those families live? And some of the issues with that, which is what led to the analysis that I did in terms of, you know, the net changes to our housing over the last few years. It was 2018 to 2021. And just to give you those numbers, which I will send to you as well, the net change that includes the demo being subtracted and then the new units being added. Total residential units, it was positive 295 units. Studio units plus 55, 1-bedroom units plus 153, 2-bedroom units plus 55, and 3-bedroom units plus 17. So 71% of the new units being constructed in Winooski are studio or 1-bedroom. So, you know, as I had stated earlier, it's not a problem. There's a demand for those, but if we continue to skew that way, where 71% are for studios in 1-bedroom and only 6% are 3-bedroom plus, we're going to widen a gap that already existed in our community. We had fewer multi-bedroom rental units than the surrounding municipalities to begin with. So that will continue to skew that. So we need to come up with ways that we can incentivize. And when I say incentivize, I mean save money. We need, it's a money solution. This is a money problem. So with going through the Grounded Solutions inclusionary housing calculator, we looked at a series of things. And actually, Tom, I love that you brought up the impact fees, because that was one of the things that we looked at. And, you know, the reduction of parking spaces would have the single largest financial impact on affordability for new affordable housing construction and multi-bedroom units. So when we bring this memo to you today, it's primarily the previous memo that we had brought you with one addition, which is a very targeted incentive for multi-bedroom housing. And that could be, number one, the reduction of that disincentive that I spoke about previously. So requiring more parking spaces of those does not help us to build those. And already they are very financially difficult to make pencil out. In many cases, those developments, when we use the inclusionary housing calculator, they actually would lead to the developer coming in at a loss. So they would owe money after developing a building that is three-bedroom properties, three-bedroom units. So that's not ideal for anyone who is trying to put together a retirement fund or their kids' college fund. So that, and you know, yeah, that's how you have to think of development. I think in many cases that's what it is. It is an investment. And so it has to provide some kind of return. It definitely can't leave you at a deficit. So the one piece that we are adding to this is really to look at reducing those parking minimums requirements for multi-bedroom units, and those all the way up to 100% area median income. So people who are making the median income, we have a gap across the board. So it's not just for the affordable, deeply affordable, but for up to 100% area median income is what we're recommending. And I'll give you an example of what I did a little bit of work with CHT because I was the project manager on Butternut Grove on the city end. So I've worked closely with CHT on that. And I requested from them what their parking construction actually cost. So it was $45,000 per parking space for them to build that structured parking. Initially, their initial projections were even higher than that, but they've brought that down since. So if we were only to remove that additional, those are all 3-bedroom units, 20 units. If we were to remove just the 0.5 additional parking spaces for every one of those units, because they're 3 bedrooms, that would be 10 parking spaces, which would save that project $450,000. So it's a significant impact. And I'm going to stop talking. I just wanted to kind of give you the high level, like this is what we're coming forward with. And I want to turn it over to Robert so that you can dive into some more details if you would like.
Before you do that, Heather, you kind of conked out on my computer when you're giving those numbers. What was the number of 2 bedrooms?
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me get those back in front of me. I will send this to you so you all have the 2 bedrooms was 55. So it was 19% studio units, 52% 1-bedroom units, 19% 2-bedroom units, and 6% 3+ bedrooms.
Thank you. Sorry, Robert.
No, that's fine.
You've been so patient here tonight, Robert.
What's that?
I say you've been so patient waiting.
I'm totally okay listening. I think people much smarter than me with a much stronger background have had the floor first, and you know I'm more here to back up. You know, Heather I think hit on the brunt of what we've been discussing, and the memo you know covers a lot of those details. You know, so I really don't know what to add other than to just to back up that this is where the Housing Commission has come to on these things after reviewing some pretty significant data. I can, you know, speak to the program Heather mentioned, the online, which really allowed us to experiment with different things and see how different possible incentives could theoretically really play out. And Heather was even able to get some real numbers from some local developers. So So we weren't just making things up, we were pulling some real world numbers to try to get there. And there is just a very limited number of things that we can control at the local level that are that work as incentives for what we want, whether it's more 3 bedrooms or more affordable housing or what have you. And really the parking seems to be one of the biggest pieces. And I know we're still waiting on the most recent parking study, but you know, we did have the downtown parking study not too long ago, and I wouldn't be shocked to see some similar numbers come out of there. So, you know, I think moving ahead with some things makes a lot of sense, even as we wait for that to come to finish. Well, I guess technically I'm involved in that, right? So, thanks for the reminder, Eric, that that's just a couple weeks from now. I see hands, so I'd much rather answer questions.
Go ahead, Tommy.
Well, one of the questions that I have as we look at this is, we earlier heard the percentage of affordable housing, and I know that affordable housing going up to the median is very different than the low income housing. And did you folks look at what the market is versus our surrounding communities and what's Winooski's relative share?
Yeah, we've looked at that a lot. That was one of the first things that we looked at. The percentage of affordable, whether it's big A or small A. You know, Seth likes to point out there's a big difference between like federal, state, big A affordable versus just small A affordable. Our share is much higher as a percentage of overall than our surrounding communities. So we've looked a lot from the beginning at ways to encourage not just not affordable housing alone, not big A affordable housing alone, but you know, middle income.
We established targets, Tommy. So one of the gaps that we found in our community is affordable housing for people who are between 80% of the area median income and 120% of the area median income. So we have more housing that is under the 80% that would be low income housing. That moderate income housing is a gap in our community. So that's one of the targets that was initially set by the Housing Commission.
And recommendations as far as, are there any recommendations that you would have related to that for the Planning Commission to help move that dial in the direction that we want to go? I'm not sure that parking, I mean, I hear what you're saying with parking. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But are there other recommendations that you might have for the Planning Commission to make it incentivize developers to target the markets that we're looking for?
I think, you know, I think it's in the memo, and I think it's already on your radar to look at the existing density bonuses, the bonuses around that, and re-examine whether they're doing what we want, which, you know, speaking as someone who was on the council when we voted on form-based code, that was the understanding we had at the time, was that we were going to come back to that much sooner than has been able to happen. So,
and Tommy, those bonuses are actually set in the form-based code to be for the 80 to 120% area median income. So the gap that I was just talking about is what those incentives are specifically slated to in the language of the form-based code. Unfortunately, because I believe, and this is one reason we're coming forward with the parking recommendation first, because of the limited lot sizes that are available along the form-based code parcels, when you give people a bonus story for providing housing that is within that range, they can't necessarily build the parking to be able to support it without going further underground and having increased costs that would then nullify the benefit of doing that additional story.
Got it.
I want to kind of add on one piece that really struck me when I observed the commission going through this quantitative exercise, is just to emphasize the order of magnitude is squarely on density bonuses and parking. Like there aren't really other incentive structures we can use beyond those that'll have the same bang for the buck. So yes, you can, like as Tom was saying, like yes, a little bit of additional fee relief could add some to a project, but it's not even in the same playing field as parking requirement reductions or density bonuses. So I think we're thinking about incentive-based approaches instead of not looking at waivers and not looking at regulatory approaches. We can discuss the other ones, but if you want to get the most benefit for the city, what our goals are around 3-bedroom units, around middle income affordable housing, those two really just are going to continue to rise to the top. And there's other things we can consider, but they'd be icing on the cake rather than one of the layers in the sheet.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I know this is like a completely different direction in a way, but does the city have a target number for its population? I mean, how many people can we actually fit in this 1 square mile? How much?
1 million.
How much is that true?
No.
I mean, capacity. Cool. No, I'm saying what I mean.
Yeah.
Sort of feel like, should we go from the top down? I mean, what are we trying to? How many people are we trying to get to live here? And it's gotten very. I'm sorry, guys. I know you talk this talk every day, but it's gotten a little abstract for me. I'm not sure. How many families do we want? How many single people do we want? How many houses do they need? How many beds do they need to sleep in?
I see the mayor wants to respond to that. Christine?
We've been growing at 1% per year for the last 10 years. So I think at a minimum, we need to think about that continuing. There's no,
Right, but
I don't think
what
there's a goal on population size.
Could we become overpopulated? Would that
If we
be a
don't,
problem?
yes, but we do have capacity. We have data on the capacity of our wastewater infrastructure, on our streets, on our housing, and we're not like coming to some precipice of not having capacity for that growth. And it is something that gets looked at from time to time. So we're able, if we do start growing beyond 1% a year, we will know if we start to come up against those thresholds.
And how many children do we want to get into the school, and how many children can the school accommodate?
They also have those numbers. I don't recall them offhand, but they are building this brand new facility to accommodate a significant increase in students.
Yeah.
I mean, Sarah, I think those are all great questions. I know a lot of times I'll do work at a university and they'll say, well, we want to increase our population by, 2 or 3%, by 2030 or something. And so you need to look at all the different aspects of what that does. And I'm just curious if the town has looked at that from your sewer, from your public facilities, from your open space, from like all those elements to really know that you're providing the services that amount of people would need. And because we are such a small space, I'm sure we could figure out what the capacity could be for a healthy environment.
Yeah,
I thought that Eric actually had presented us with a figure at one point of something like 200 expected units in the next 10 years added, as far as housing was kind of the range of what was anticipated. I might be misquoting that. I'm sorry.
It's 260 households. It was part of the transportation impact fee.
Okay, very good. So I wasn't entirely off. Thank you.
Wait, 260 households that we want to get in here. What kind of a time frame?
By when?
I think it was like 10 years, wasn't it? Is that, I'm misquoting.
Yeah, I don't know.
The regional planning commission does projections for all their municipalities, and that's the information that we used in the transportation impact fee, or the impact fee assessment as well. It's basically a projection of growth rates, of capacity, of availability. It's not necessarily a target that we're trying to hit to say that we want that many. It's just kind of what we're projected to potentially to take on, given all the other factors that are at play and historic growth rates as well.
And I think the other factor to add there is the more housing you do add, the harder it becomes to add additional housing because, you know, the built area
It's limited. Yeah.
is yeah.
So we need to be wise about what's being.
I think Abby has been patiently raising her hand for quite a while here. Sorry.
Where is Abby?
Yeah,
there you are.
no,
There you
Sarah,
are.
I think that's an important point. Like Amy said, universities project out, like UVM projects out, no, they don't want to grow. They're like, no growth, you know, and that's like providing some foresight for planning and everything for the property up there. And so we can't grow at 1% endlessly for like so tiny and so densely packed in as it is. That's definitely worth exploring in more detail. But I kind of wanted to point out one thing to bring the Housing Commission and Tom up to speed on. And then the second thing I feel like is the elephant in the room. I'm surprised no one has mentioned it because we have spent a lot of time talking about it on the commission. So the first thing is we have talked about, you know, developers coming and saying, you know, we don't need parking. People are walking and biking and taking the bus. And I'm like, we have so much work to be done. I mean, very obviously in our bike infrastructure, which is almost non-existent. So where are they biking? Our sidewalks are decent, but a lot of areas are lacking repairs or sidewalks. And then our busing is like good for the area, but it's not like a great, reliable, all the time, 7-day service, 24/7, 15-minute service, the kind of things that make people be like, I don't need a car. So it's hard for us to swallow the parking reduction without the infrastructure. So it's like, great, let's make a community where people don't need to have a car. Who's paying and installing the sidewalks? Who's paying and installing bike lanes? And what often happens is they say, we'll use on-street parking. And then it makes it really hard to install bike lanes after you've designated roads to on-street parking. And so Burlington deals with this all the time when they're trying to get bike infrastructure in place. It's such an uphill battle, which is one of the reasons we recommended against having that on-street parking at the Casadant Overlook, because we don't have sufficient bike infrastructure and sidewalk infrastructure on one of our busiest roads. It got installed anyway. We told it's temporary, but it sounds like, Tom, you're like counting that as a part of your resident parking, but we're told that that's going to be removed. Like that's not part of the parking, but you know, over time, your residents are going to feel like it's part of their parking and that you guys want it. And it just becomes really hard to take that away. So it's hard for us to say, get rid of parking minimums, or you don't need as much parking on site until we deal with the on-street infrastructure for alternative modes. So that's one thing.
At the same time, that's a huge important point that you're making.
Yes.
And I think we have some plans in place for some of those things. And certainly that is very much part of the conversation. But to feed into that conversation a little bit, I also have numbers on renters that have vehicles in the city. So initially, when I delivered this memo in 2019, I was looking at 2017 data. And at that time, the number of dwelling units, so not bedrooms, not number of renters, renter households, no matter how many bedrooms, that had no vehicle was 18%. As of 2019, I've just updated it, that was 23%. So to some extent, I think that we're encouraging, as we are bringing in people into these 1-bedroom units, they're not bringing cars with them. And part of that is because we are the walkable, dense, smart growth urban center that we are. We do need to improve all of the things that you're talking about. But by removing the parking spaces, you're actually removing the likelihood of bringing more cars. It becomes less convenient to park your car if you don't have an automatic 2 parking spaces with your unit.
So I guess my question is, how is the survey conducted and how do you get every renter person to complete it?
Oh, it's not a survey. No, I'm sorry, that's from US Census data. So it's American Community Survey data, and it's something that I reference repeatedly. It is not ideal data or perfect data, but it does show a trend over time. And what I'm seeing is a continuous reduction and based on the number of cars that are in the city, with the addition of 105 units in those 2 years, there was actually a net reduction in renter vehicles in the city of 53 cars. So I believe that what is happening is you're finding that some of the younger millennials, Gen Z are less likely. There's a lot of evidence that they're less likely to purchase a car. They're less likely to purchase a home. So it's trending in that direction. And then when you make it more difficult to park a car, it's not as easy to just, park as many cars as you want. Then they're more likely to be using alternative forms of transportation and become voices in support of actually building out that bike infrastructure and the sidewalk infrastructure. So I think there's a possibility that this could actually help to move in the direction that you're looking to move. I'm a walker, so I am very strongly, I don't have a vehicle. I'm very strongly in your camp as far as getting that done, but I think this will help that.
Yeah, and so the second point is the newest development obviously caused a huge stir with parking between the Casavan Overlook. The 3 developments there was like a lot of upset neighbors and quite a lot of feedback the Planning Commission received about insufficient parking, over parking in the neighborhoods, undercounting the necessary parking, lots of backlash from the development and how much parking was available. And lots of raw feelings about parking in the city because of it. So just cautioning that this will be we have to approach this very sensitively and very smartly, because nobody wants what happened in that neighborhood, which is a lot of people were pushed out on street parking in the neighborhood in a way that the neighbors felt like they weren't involved in we heard that the renters felt like they were duped, like they were told they had parking and then they didn't, and now or they didn't want to pay for parking, so they're just parking on the streets, or they're parking out over at the deli. Like they're probably not counting in the numbers when you say who's parking on site, because they're not paying you, but they are bringing cars and they are parking in the neighborhoods, and there are some issues going on with gateway developments. That's not the only one, but with gateway developments bleeding into neighborhoods and how neighbors are impacted and what that conversation is. And with the form-based code, just really streamlining things. We've obviously talked about the pros of that, but the cons of that are how the neighbors feel like they can't participate in the process, but they deal with the consequences of those developments. So just throwing that out there, because we spent lots of time at the Planning Commission talking about that, and also receiving a lot of participation from constituents that were really feeling bad about the way that the parking was developed for those.
Yeah. And if I just follow up on that, because I do think that there's something really there, because as I see it, it's definitely the communication part of it rather than the actual amount of parking that is available. Because what you're seeing now, I was at the large meeting, of course, with all the neighbors that were there, and we talked about, okay, we have Casavan over here, and it was pretty unanimous, everybody acknowledging that the amount of parking there was not impacting the neighborhood, and just the 4 spaces out front, those are in addition. We have enough parking there for all of our cars, and now what we've seen, now that we're finishing development, if you've seen the neighbors there, they've come in and asked to have on-street parking eliminated. They all signed a petition saying that they don't need all that on-street parking. And it was really, what I saw was better communication up front to show folks, I was probably not as aware of what a hot button issue it was going to be. So when I came and presented to them, I said, all I had was our data to say, when this is done, we are building enough parking. I have so much data to show that we are building enough for everybody here. And I stand behind that fact that this building's about to go up and our folks are not going to be using the streets there. Now, whether you would want them to, that's a different question. That's a policy question, whether it would actually be okay to have not a space for every single person at the community, which I think there's a good argument for. But just on the ground, I think what you're going to see is we're parking everyone at these communities, but messaging up front to all of a sudden they say, oh, this is developed and I didn't know about it. I understand how that's room for improvement on my side as a developer, to peg those issues before they start to blow up.
And are there residents on Manso asking to remove on-street parking because they don't want overflow? I think that's why, because they don't want overflow parking from the apartments. They're asking to eliminate on-street opportunities.
I guess so. I saw the petition. I wasn't 100% sure. It seemed like a lot of folks, they wanted to have on-street parking eliminated, so that residents on Mansto wouldn't be able to park there.
Yeah, and I think
My understanding of their desire to eliminate the on-street parking was so that that area could be used as a basically a path. They could walk there while the discussion is ongoing about getting funding for a sidewalk on that. So they felt that it was a better option for them to be able to walk in the street than to have the vehicles parked on the street. So that's why they submitted the petition to eliminate the parking.
It sounds fairly logical that they're thinking we would rather park in our own driveways and not have the use of the street in front of us and have it completely congested by the overflow and eventually possibly get a sidewalk out of it. So they're foregoing a benefit to their neighborhood in lieu of something else.
But just to, I was just gonna say, so you're hearing all of us talk a little bit. These are the kinds of discussions that we're having. And so this is how, this information that you give to us, this is sort of how we'll be hashing it out. And there's another thing and Eric, maybe you remember better than I did, but there might be some legal implications too about one of the problem we ran into when we presented a reduction in parking and then asked for council not to approve it, was that we kept coming across, you couldn't just say, okay, we'll reduce parking for multifamily homes. There was a sort of across the board that we had to work with. And I don't know legally if we're just going to need more assistance or knowledge to what you, I think, Tom, you brought up a couple of things, like you were talking about senior housing. Well, obviously, yeah, it would be great. We should eliminate that. Or more units that are going to be for families. Well, kids are not going to have a car. How do we do that? Can we do that all legally to pinpoint things that specifically? So that's another part of the discussion I think we'll be having.
So
I mean,
we can we can set it up so that there are different rates for different uses. I think the issue that we were running into previously was with the discussion of the parking waiver was that there was a desire to only allow certain uses to take advantage of the waiver.
Yeah.
We were limiting who could actually use it, which is where I was concerned that would cause some potential legal issues to say that, yes, a public institution like the school could use the parking waiver, but just a regular developer of housing could not. Right. But we can establish different rates for different uses if we want to get into that level of detail in our existing regulations for parking.
Which we might need to, which is a lot of work, but we can do that, I think, right?
That's
Jim, I'm sorry, was that Jim that wanted to say something?
I just wanted to share the Housing Commission's been very careful to talk about this as multi-bedroom unit construction and not family housing, because that is a fair housing issue. We can't restrict who gets these houses to people with kids. So just to make that clear that that's going to have to be part of this discussion. There is no way to ensure that a family will go rent a 3-bedroom that gets constructed. We can't require that. We can maintain income for affordability and for a period of time or in perpetuity, but you can't. So you can deal with the income piece, but not the actual types of people who are living in that building or that unit. So if you notice, the Housing Commission language has been very clear and careful on that, and we continue to be consistent on that.
Thanks,
I'm curious.
I just want to give a time check. It is 8 o'clock, so we can continue going. That's fine. Or we can wrap it up. But Abby, were you trying to say something before I cut in?
I just have what I hope is a quick question. Maybe Tom can lend some insight to this, but we had heard sort of off the cuff from a developer that they're going to build bigger units. They're going to build them in Burlington, not in Winooski. Wondering why that's the case and what we can do to change that.
So they said if they were going to build 3 or 4 bedroom units, they would skew toward Burlington.
Yeah.
That
demand. I have an answer to that. Actually, I spoke with a developer who told me the same thing. Okay. In Burlington, they recently eliminated parking minimums in several areas of the city. And that was the reason that I was given by that developer.
Specifically for 3+ bedroom?
It was, I think they eliminated them across the board in certain areas.
They did, yeah.
Yeah, so I was told by a developer, that's why there are developments over there that are more bedrooms.
Okay.
Yeah, on the demand side, there wouldn't be any difference in my opinion.
So given it's 8:01, first I'll thank everyone for coming today, the Seth and Tom and Jim and Robert and Heather, and who else am I missing that's not a regular member? I guess that's it. Thank you, but before we wrap, if anyone has any final last comments they want to share with us, thoughts, please do so.
My only thought would be thank you to Seth and Tom, because I do think they presented some very interesting data. So I think this was a very meaningful collaboration from all these folks.
Yeah, and
we need to do it more.
I was just going to say, I think that, unfortunately our time was limited. I think we could have a lot longer discussion about all these topics. So we may be reaching out to Seth and Tom and the rest of you folks in the future.
Yes, definitely.
Happy to help and support the conversations any way we can. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Any other final comments on this topic before we move to the next agenda item? I think people are ready to bolt. It looks like Heather's got a big smile on her face, like, oh, finally it's over.
I start vacation tomorrow, so I'm ready to bolt.
Okay. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Let's move on to city business. Eric or Christine, or even Jim, if you want to hang around. Oh, I guess Jim just left.
I'll start. I just have a couple of quick updates under city updates. The primary one I think that I just wanted to mention is that the pool has finally closed for the season. This past weekend was the last day. Apparently, it was very successful. The creamy stand, however, will stay open for a little while longer. So if anybody wants to go get a creamy, feel free to do that. They'll still be available for that. But that's the primary item I wanted to mention under city updates.
Do you know what the hours are? Because I can never seem to find them.
Creamy hour.
I don't know offhand.
I don't think they're on the website.
They're pretty active on social media, so they may have something there.
Okay.
Instagram, it's like, well, it was when the pool was open, it was like 12 to 6 Thursday through Sunday. But now that the pool is closed, I'm not sure, but Instagram is where I check. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my problem.
So on the pool, congratulations to the city, to Christine, and to everyone else.
Yeah.
What a tremendous asset that is to the city.
Yeah.
We're actually going to get like a overview summary sort of how the season went at an upcoming council meeting. So that can be interesting. You're probably aware that on Tuesday at City Council, we had Vermont Air National Guard leadership in and a significant amount of public comment. I took notes on all the questions that were raised by residents and shared those with VTANG leadership. They're going to get us back a written response. And we're going to do like a push out like we do with our agendas and all of our other updates. So that'll be coming forward. I also sent the recording of that, the town meeting TV recording to our senators in the governor's office with a recommendation to check out what our residents are saying.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
Because I've been writing and calling them all, and just the responses are just canned. There's nothing.
They thank me for sending it.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
No response. No like substantial response.
That's what's hurting is you're not really. I feel like we keep speaking up and we're just not getting a straight answer. And maybe there is no straight answer. It's the federal government, and Vermont has no control over it either. I don't know.
But if for nothing else, take consolation in the fact that they can't say nobody didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And so it does have value whether or not it advances.
Yeah.
Christine, if I could ask you, did they mention anything about when the F-35s came the projection was a reduction in the number of flights annually.
Yeah, so the F-16s operated about 8,000 flights a year, and they have so far been doing 2, and they're projected to do 5 a year. So it is less than
It is.
what it was in years past.
Okay, well, those are the numbers that they gave at the start. Just that now we're getting, I think, 6 or 8 taking off daily as opposed to 4. That's what prompted that.
That is one thing. I had those numbers from you, and I shared those with them in advance. And I did request in the written response for them to include like hard data on what's actually happening.
Yeah, Christine, I thought you did a really good job moderating it, like asking pointed questions, keeping it moving forward, but giving everybody a chance to speak. Like, I thought it was really well facilitated. And appreciate just the straightforward questions that you had and your ability to like re-ask them from what our residents were saying. You know, I felt like, somebody called out the council for not asking questions, you know, and I agree. Like, it's you guys are our representatives, like, and we the people are kind of like suffering from this. So I really just wanted to say I appreciated you coming with questions, asking questions, and then reframing the questions to make sure that we get answers, because a lot of their participation was like, we're not high enough up to be able to answer this, you know. So anyway, I just wanted to say that I thought that the very clear questions from you and the follow-up that you're asking for is really wonderful.
So I appreciate that. And then my last update is that we, at the next meeting on 9/20, we'll have our city manager finalist presentations. And we'll be doing some push out and outreach around that too, to try to get public engagement. Happy to have anyone's feedback. We will take public feedback on that into consideration when we have our final discussion about putting an offer out. So stay tuned for, it'll be on Zoom, but the actual details.
My computer's fooling around today. I missed, what was that topic?
The 9/20 meeting will have our city manager finalist presentations, and are hoping to get resident input and feedback on that.
How does the
Are there 2 finalists?
What's that?
Are there 2 finalists?
Yeah, we interviewed 3 and advanced 2. What was that, Sarah?
How does the public get feedback to that? To
us.
Yes, to you. Sorry.
Yeah, so that'll be when we do like the push out saying this is coming up. There'll be options for email, social media. Like Yaz, our equity director, she's gonna put together a proposal of like different input ways that we can hear from folks.
Okay. Yeah.
And it'll be recorded too. So like if you can't attend, you can absolutely watch the recording, and we'll have a 7-day open comment period.
Is it not until 9/20 that we find out the names of the 2 finalists, or 9/20?
It'll be before that. Whenever we get out the information saying this is how you can engage and this is the upcoming meeting details. I don't know if I'm supposed to say them yet though, so I won't. That's it for my council updates.
Thank you.
Oh, no, one more.
Oh, okay.
On September 21, Tuesday the 21st, John and Phoebe will be joining me for an orientation for new commissioners. So Brendan, you'll be getting an invitation to that. And we'll also invite all existing commissioners as optional if you care to join as well. So that information will also be forwarded.
Oh, I'll look forward to that. Thank you.
So Brennan, you're still on after this evening's meeting?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I'll say that, I really enjoyed this, and it's really impressive to me how engaged everybody is and committed, and it's really so far so good. So I'm excited to be part of it.
I'm gonna let you say it. couple things.
Yeah, I got, trying to be selective, but it's a good start.
Eric,
And
does
if-
that mean we're fully stocked? Like our commission alternates are all full?
Yep.
We have a full slate of membership right now.
Sweet. That is the word I was looking
And
for.
I think we were all here tonight.
Yep, everybody's here.
All here tonight. That's pretty impressive too. Just because you were here, Brendan, everyone decided to show up.
Yeah, everyone's so excited to meet
Meet the
me.
new guy.
Just got everybody in.
So does anyone have any other business they want to discuss tonight?
I have a question.
Sure.
Just because I'm going to keep asking this, but has the city continued conversation about the former St. Stephen's site? Has there been any movement on that, or is that still kind of dormant?
Has the city had conversations?
Yeah, I thought that we had discussed about the city possibly being in conversation with the diocese about the outcome of that property and what.
I think, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the diocese is still trying to figure out what they want to do with it at this point.
Okay.
It's actually St. Francis Parish Council is trying to figure out what to do with it. Yeah. The city has been in conversation only so much as a conversation with the Winooski Housing Authority to see if there's any kind of joint thing there. But at this point, there's really nothing that I can report.
Okay. I'm curious. I mean, there is, an important piece of municipal real estate that's on there. Or municipal infrastructure rather, that's housed on that real estate. That's partly why I'm concerned about it.
Well, yeah, and so nothing can happen with that 1 acre that's leased.
Yeah.
Until 2044.
Sure, I understand that, but whatever the future may be for the rest of the parcel could have effect upon that 1 acre.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, if there's no other business, I would look for a
Real quick, I just wanted to remind folks, our next meeting is scheduled for September 23rd. So that'll be the fourth Thursday here, and we will pick back up with our discussions on form-based code amendments.
And I will be out of town that night.
Oh no! What will we do without you, Mike?
You're gonna have a great discussion without me. That's so
24th. Okay.
23rd.
23rd. Two weeks from tonight. Yeah.
Who did we end up making the what's the
Yeah, I was no longer.
It was Abby?
Abby is the vice chair.
Abby, that's going to be yours to run, Abby.
She can do it.
Shoot, I should have been paying better attention, Mike.
Just punt. That's what I do.
You do a good
Hi, Eric's
job.
here, right?
So, hearing no other business, looking for a motion to adjourn. And before you do that, thank you everyone for coming and for listening tonight and your comments.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll
second that.
Joe? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No one's opposed, I assume? Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Christine. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Good evening,
everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.